Good evening and welcome everyone to the Ravenswood City School District Governing Board meeting of February 24th, 2022. I will open the meeting at 6:31 p.m. I will take roll call. Vice President Chabot Maheen is absent. Trustee Alexander here. Trustee Polito is running late. Trustee Bloom here. I myself am present. Quorum is present. We will move on to item number 2, which is the approval of the agenda. Do we have any corrections?
Yes, through the chair. Item BC should reflect resolution 2021/22-13. The document attached does have the correct number, but the agenda item needs to be updated.
So under 8, which is the business department, number C, letter C, there's a correction in the -12, it is -13. Do we have any other comments or questions on the agenda? I see none. I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I will make a motion to approve the agenda.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion carries 3-0. Our next item is number 3, which is closed session. Before we go into closed session, if there's any members of the public that would like to address the board on any matters that will be discussed during closed session, this is your time. As I see none, we will go into closed session at 6:33 p.m. Thank you. Solomon, I am ready. Okay, I'll give you a minute. Thank you, Solomon. Welcome back. We will reconvene open session at 7:27 p.m. And just to report back on matters that were discussed during closed session, during item 3A1, there was discussion and action was taken. During item 3A2, there was discussion and action was taken. And during 3B, there was discussion. And for item 3C and 3D, there was discussion. And that sums it up. Moving on to item number 5, which is from the floor. This is the time in which, if there's anyone from the public that wishes to address the board on any matters that are not agendized, this is your time. None. Wonderful. Moving on to item number 6, from the consent agenda. Do we have any questions or comments from the board? I see none. I will entertain a motion for item number 6.
I'll make a motion to approve item number 6.
Thank you.
I will second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion carries 3-0. Moving on to item number 7, which is curriculum and instruction. We will have a presentation, a mid-year presentation on Lcap.
Good evening, President Latu, members of the board. I'm Lara Berenin, Director of Curriculum and Instruction, and I'll be presenting the mid-year LCAP update and 21-22 supplement this evening. So to start off, a little reminder, what is LCAP? The Local Control and Accountability Plan is a 3-year district-level plan that describes the goals, actions, services, and expenditures to support positive student outcomes that address state and local priorities. The 8 state priorities are delineated in the graphic to the right. So the LCAP is our district's opportunity to share stories of how, what, and why programs and services are selected to meet our local needs. This is a reminder of the timeline that we're currently in for our 3-year LCAP. Our 3-year LCAP ranges from the school year 21-22, so this year, through 23-24. You can see that it's intentionally aligned to the strategic plan and due to the LCP that we had last year because of COVID. The final year of our 3-year LCAP actually aligns with the final year of our 5-year strategic plan. On this timeline, you also see the SIPSAs there as a reminder that are written and implemented at the site level each year. So our LCAP is aligned to our strategic plan, and our SIPSAs are aligned to our LCAP. And here we are in the 21-22 school year. So some background on the presentation today. So Section 124E of Assembly Bill 130 requires us to present an update to the 21-22 LCAP on or before February 28th, 2022 at a regularly scheduled board meeting. And this mid-year update is a new component required by the state this year. At the meeting, we must include these 3 components. The first is an attached document on the board agenda, and that is a complete update with all available mid-year outcome and implementation data related to all metrics, expenditures, and actions identified in the 21-22 LCAP. So this attachment is quite detailed. The second required document is also attached on the board agenda. This is the supplement for the annual update for the 21-22 LCAP, which contains 5 narrative prompts, and I'll explain more about that on slide 6. And then finally, we also need to provide an update on information included in the budget overview for parents based on the impact of the California 2021 Budget Act. And that information is captured on slide 5. So we just wanted to make sure that everyone knows that these 3 components are included this evening in various slides and attachments. So for the budget overview for parents, this is one of the required components when the LCAP and budget are adopted each spring. When our LCAP and budget were adopted on June 24th, 2021, the California Budget Act was not complete. So the impact to our 21-22 budget overview for parents since then is illustrated in the table below. So you can see for each of the funding source in the table, there's the projected amount that we initially had for the 21-22 budget, the revised amount, and then in the third column, the difference. The next component of the mid-year update is the supplement for the annual update for the 21-22 LCAP. And the supplement consists of 5 prompts. The document is asking us about these prompts because districts received extra funds due to the need to respond to COVID. So the supplement is asking about community engagement for state funds, the use of concentration funds, community engagement for federal funds, implementation of the ESSER 3 plan, and alignment with the 21-22 LCAP. So for this document, Ravenswood has focused on developing a holistic district-wide budget that includes and incorporates all these funding sources alongside the LCAP and strategic plan. Our increased transparency around district budgeting processes have provided opportunities for staff, families, the community, and the board to provide input and feedback. So these input and feedback processes go back to last spring when we were developing our LCAP, learning of the amounts that would be available to us in extra COVID response funding, and creating our plans for this school year and beyond. So for more information, you can refer to the attached document titled Supplement to the Annual Update for the 21-22 LCAP. And that document and the others I'm referencing are also available on our district website. So for our LCAP mid-year update, some context to keep in mind is that as we share about a few of our metrics, actions, and expenditures, at this point in the year, some of them are unknown or not started, some of them are in progress, and then some of them are known or complete. And they're, as I just explained, they're all at different levels of completion. And our LCAP is intended to be publicly reviewed, presented, modified, and approved annually. So community engagement and LCAP development processes typically run from January to May, with a public hearing and board approval scheduled for June. This slide is a recap of our LCAP goals, just as a reminder. So we have 4 broad goals that align to the first 4 priorities of our strategic plan. Broad goal 1 is standards aligned instruction across all content areas. Broad goal 2 is safe and joyful environments, including social, emotional, and behavioral supports. Broad goal 3 is to recruit and retain staff. Broad goal 4 is family engagement. With our LCAP, we also developed 4 focus goals based on our community engagement for this year, based on the needs illustrated in our California dashboard data. Our first focus goal is around reading goals for students with disabilities. Our second focus goal is around middle school mathematics. Our third focus goal is reclassifying English learners. And our fourth focus goal is around chronic absenteeism. In the mid-year update document, you can also see an update for this time of year around the different metrics in our plan. So as I mentioned, some of them are unknown at this time of year. So for example, our 2022 state testing data, 2021 California dashboard reports, and some of the surveys that we've planned to administer. Other metrics listed in the plan are in progress. So for example, looking at student growth from beginning of year to end of year assessments, that's in progress. We'll be able to assess that after we capture end of year data. The percent of students meeting grade level expectations, attendance, again, some of our surveys, and family engagement. And then some of our metrics are known. So we know our 2021 LPAC results. We received those over the summer. Based on those results, we were able to identify English learners able to be reclassified. And we also completed our 2021 Williams audit. And then we also have some of our teacher retention rates and credentialing status data known. For the update on each of our actions that can be found in the attachment, again, we have some that are not started, some in progress, and some complete. So 6% of our actions are identified as not started. A few of these include the K-5 social studies pilot and adoption and our ELD assessment, which haven't been feasible to tackle this year. 90% of our actions are currently in progress. We're in the middle of the year, so that's probably not surprising. So for example, this includes implementing extended school day, literacy intervention, family weekly workshops, ELD instruction, and professional development. And then a few of our actions, 4%, are considered complete. So this includes actions such as increasing compensation for teachers and the summer school program that we held in summer 2021. And then finally, in that report, you'll also see an update on expenditures for each of our actions. Expenditures are typically aligned with the progress of the actions, so many of them are in progress. And many of our LCAP actions are also scheduled for end-of-year invoicing and payment. So although some of them reflect that there's not been a large amount spent thus far, many of the actions are in progress and we pay for them at the end of the year. The business office monitors all district expenditures throughout the year and presents this information at regular intervals. So the the graph represented here was shared at the December 9th, 2021 board meeting, and it's not specific to expenditures associated with individual LCAP actions, but to see those, you can refer to the mid-year update attachment that goes action by action. So for next steps, we'll continue to implement the 21-22 LCAP, collecting the relevant outcome and expenditure data to evaluate our progress. We are also in the middle of our community engagement to formulate our 22-23 LCAP. And so some of those opportunities for giving input include DAC, DLAC, and school site counselor ELAC meetings, district-wide surveys, staff meetings, office hours with district staff. And then there will be additional information on our district website, or you can email our compliance coordinator, Allison Officer, at aofficer@ravenswoodschools.org. And then finally, for engagement, we've also started a process at our district leadership level of implementing empathy interviews. So just last week, we had the opportunity to introduce this with our district leadership team and share the idea that we'd like our LCAP engagement this year to really focus on centering marginalized voices in this process, trying to capture deeper rather than broader input, and really take a listening lens to this process. Any questions or comments about our mid-year update?
Thank you for your report. Do we have any questions or comments from the board?
Through the chair. You mentioned the number about the children being reclassified. Is it appropriate to ask you now how many children are up for reclassification? Do you know?
Oh, yes. Not off the top of my head, but it is in the report.
You can get back to me at some other time. It doesn't have to be tonight, Ms. Brennan.
Okay, I can identify the page it's on.
Wonderful. I see no other questions.
Right, through the chair, just one question. So on the slide where you have the not started, in progress, and complete, you have percentage points. And I know that this is a report that was issued by the state this year, so it's early. So my question is the goal to have 100% complete by the June update that we receive?
Oh, that's a great question. So that can happen, but actually what's typical in LCAP implementation processes is for things to come up and change as the school year goes on. So it's not expected that 100% of actions will be completed, but the purpose of providing now this mid-year update and typically our annual update is to report on what we've been able to implement, what we've changed and what we've not been able to implement and why. So along with our LCAP for 22-23, that we'll present to you for approval, first a public hearing and then approval in June, we'll also share the annual update.
Thank you.
Wonderful. If we don't have any other questions or comments, thank you so much. We will move on. Just for the notes, Trustee Polito joined us during the presentation. Thank you. Next up, we will go to item number 8, which is from our business department. We'll kick it off with 8A, which is our 2022 bond survey results presentation from FM3.
Thank you, trustees. You may remember several months ago, the board authorized us to partner with FM3, a community research firm. They conducted a very large survey of East Palo Alto voters and Eastern Menlo Park voters to suss out the feasibility of a bond this summer. I'd like to introduce Dave Metz from FM3. He'll walk you through the results of the finding from the survey. At a high level, though, the survey did reiterate, as past surveys have done, that there is substantial support in the community for a bond, which we'll talk about more in item 8B. Without further ado, here's Dave.
Thank you very much, Will. Members of the board, it's a pleasure to be with you today. I'm Dave Metz, partner with FM3 Research, and I'm pleased to present the results of our most recent survey of district voters to assess their views of the district overall and their support for a potential bond measure. This poll is the third in a series of polls we've conducted for the district over the course of the last 6 years. And so we present some of the findings tonight in the context of results we have seen from prior polls. And as Will noted, the methodology for this poll involved surveying a little over 300 voters district-wide who were considered likely to cast ballots in this June's primary election. Surveys were conducted on landline phones, on wireless phones, and in English and Spanish, as well as some online survey interviews as well, to try to have the most diverse and representative participation in the survey that we could achieve. We were in the field just before the holidays and then for a few days afterwards to wrap up the interviewing. And this is the largest response we've had to any of the 3 surveys that we've conducted for the district. Overall, the news from the survey is very good. And I think the fundamental question that we were trying to answer is whether a bond measure is feasible for this year's election. The answer is clearly yes. There's consistent support from more than 7 in 10 voters for a bond measure. That's true at the beginning of the survey, and it's true after we expose them to both pro and con arguments that might be part of any community debate around a bond measure. And since a measure just needs a 55% threshold to win approval, the level of support is well over that required threshold. We've also seen steadily improving attitudes toward the district and towards its schools over the course of the last few years, both in terms of the district's overall performance and its financial management. And I think that growing confidence contributes to the level of support that voters offer. I'll go through the findings here and highlight some of the things that voters see as the highest priorities for investments in improving schools. But again, overall, the results are highly encouraging. So to start with, a few big picture questions that we've asked in each of the surveys that we've done for the district over the last few years. We've asked people to rate the overall performance of the school district as either excellent, good, only fair, or poor. And you'll see here on the right-hand side the proportions that have offered ratings of either excellent or good in each of these surveys. The numbers have gone up 12 points in the 4 years since our last survey in terms of the positive views of the district. That is also true when we ask about the views of local classroom teachers. 44% of those polled rate them as excellent or good. That's up 11 points from what we saw in 2018. And it's also true when we ask people about their local public school more generally. That is also up 12 points from what we saw in 2018. And each of these prior polls, I should note, was conducted in advance of one of the successful measures that the district put before its voters. So that improvement in those metrics is very encouraging to see. We also asked the views of a variety of other schools in the community and people's perceptions of them relative to Ravenswood City School District. You'll see here the overall comparison between some of them. Obviously, the Ravenswood is much better known than any of the other comparison organizations that we looked at here, but the favorable ratings are pretty similar across all of them. Now, one of the core questions that we typically ask in these surveys, it's an important sort of metric to look at to assess the public's willingness to vote to tax themselves to provide additional resources to schools, is do people see a need for additional funding for local schools? And the answer came back overwhelmingly yes, with almost 4 in 5 voters saying that they perceive either a great need or some need, including an outright majority of 54% who say that they see a great need for additional funding. That's a really key statistic, and it's one that we don't see in a lot of districts. At this time, when people are naturally concerned about the cost of living, this recognition of the need the district has really lays the foundation for people being willing to vote to tax themselves. In addition, there are a few other perceptions of the district that I think also have some positive implications for the prospects of a bond measure. There's broad satisfaction with the way that the district has handled the pandemic. 55% of voters agree that Ravenswood is responding well to it. That is more than 3 times as many as tell us they disagree with that statement. When we asked about the condition of Ravenswood facilities, voters are mixed. 38% agree that it has excellent facilities, but 45% disagree. And again, that sort of recognizes a need for investment and improvements. And then finally, that last question where we asked voters if Ravenswood officials spend taxpayer money efficiently and effectively. We've seen that number growing, and at 38% in the current survey is the highest that it's been in any of our previous 3 polls. I should note, by the way, that this is not the sort of mixed results to that question are very typical. Almost any local public agency, if you ask voters how they feel about the way that it spends tax dollars, there's always just a certain amount of skepticism that is in place across the board. So that trend is a very encouraging one to see. So that takes us to the questions that we asked around the bond measure itself. The best way to test public support for a potential measure is to read voters a model of the 75-word ballot question that they would see right there on their ballot when they vote. And we worked with legal counsel to come up with a couple different models of language that comply with all the legal requirements, describe where money from a bond measure might go, and also tell voters right there in the language of the measure what the tax impact would be of a bond measure. We tested 2 slightly different descriptions of a $110 million bond measure, one that led by saying it would finish improving Ravenswood schools, and another that led by saying it would continue improving them. And statistically, there was no difference between either of those formulations. 71% of voters in total said they would vote yes, 22% said they would vote no. That includes 35% who said they would definitely vote yes, which is almost 3 times as many as the proportion who said they would definitely vote no. Again, if the measure needs 55% support to pass, it's well past that threshold and in a very strong position. Not knowing how well a $110 million measure might test, we also had a follow-up question in the poll that asked about a smaller bond with a reduced tax impact to see if that would make a difference in the level of support that voters offer. And while the support was more intense for the smaller bond measure, with 43% saying they would definitely vote yes, as opposed to 35% at 110 million, the overall level of support was comparable. It was about 2/3 of those polled. In fact, the total support went down a little bit, probably from some voters who want more investment in the schools rather than less. But the difference between those 2 amounts certainly isn't material when you think about the threshold required for approval, and that suggests that pursuing a larger investment is in line with voters' priorities. To try to make it even more specific, we let voters know what the actual range of costs for the average homeowner from the passage of the measure might be on an annual basis. They range between $100 per year at the low end and $138 at the high end. And as you'll see, the levels of support are somewhat lower when we talk about those specific cost numbers. Not surprisingly, we're kind of focusing on that bottom line cost to the taxpayer, but in each case, we still have at least 55% indicating that they would vote yes. So again, a very positive sign, even on this more rigorous test of voter support. So the last few slides here will highlight voters' reactions when we talked in more detail about some of the kinds of investments that a bond measure might support, and their reactions to the pro and con messages that we tested in the poll. These next couple slides focus on specific potential investments from a bond. We offered respondents the list of different options that you'll see on the left-hand side and had them rate the importance of each one on a 4-point scale. as either extremely, very, somewhat, or not important. We've ranked them by the total that rate each item either extremely or very important on the right. And as you look at those numbers, match those back to the 55% that's required to pass a measure, and also the 71% that were initially supported. Every item on this first slide, we have more voters telling us it's a very important priority than initially said they would vote yes on the bond. So knowing that money would go to these purposes would likely encourage an even broader segment of the community to be supportive. And you'll see a lot of these things focus on sort of nuts and bolts, basic repairs and improvements, ventilation systems, aging water pipes, but also on things like providing competitive 21st century learning at each school. And at the bottom of the slide, relatedly, upgrading classroom technology systems. It's also important right now, that second item from the bottom, making use of state matching grants. There's an awareness that from the federal level on down, money is being made available for infrastructure investments. And so putting the district in the position to be able to capture some of that investment is also encouraging for local voters. The second tier of priorities here, you'll see the numbers get down to that 71%, which was the initial level of support for the bond. But a wide range of things here that voters think are important potential uses of money, from direct investments in classrooms, and replacing portables, things like increasing the capacity to offer preschool, and just more broadly, improving Ravenswood schools. The final set of priorities you'll see here as we get down to the bottom of the slide, we do have a couple of items that fall below that 55% threshold. New multipurposes rooms and building a new gym at the middle school. Those in surveys of this type in most school districts tend to be, in relative terms, lower priorities. Although if you look at those who consider them at least somewhat important, the light blue bars, still the overwhelming majority of those polled. So the final element of the poll was to explore how voters would react to things that supporters and opponents might say, to see if that initial level of support sustains itself in the face of an expected community back and forth. And the answer is it does. We start at 71% saying they would vote yes. When voters hear some statements from people who are supportive of a measure, it rises to 76%. And even after an opposition argument, it's still at 67%, well over that 55% threshold. Here you'll see a set of statements that were at the top of the list, the ones that voters were most likely to say offered a convincing reason to support the bond measure. Talking about making school facilities resilient to face the challenges that will come from everything from wildfires to pandemics that we know schools have had to struggle with in recent years is important. Noting the total assessed need for improvements, the progress that's been made from past investments, and the way that this bond would help to complete that program of planned improvements. Talking about technology, repairs to aging schools, all of these things are highly compelling reasons among voters to vote yes. The second tier of potential statements are shown here. As you'll see on the next slide, these are still things that the vast majority of the public sees as making a good case for a bond measure, but just slightly less intense reaction. When we talk about the benefits for expanding access to pre-K, improving property values, fiscal accountability provisions, and then the district's excellent record on climate and sustainability and the ways that this measure would help to continue pursuing that goal. You'll see here the proportions that rated each of these statements either a very convincing or somewhat convincing reason to back the bond measure. The dark blue bar on the left, the proportion who rate them very convincing, is the most important metric here. We like to see 40% or higher. And there's 5 of the 8 statements that easily clear that threshold, including one that's over 50%. So even with an opposition message at the end of the poll, which made the point that the cost of living is rising, that with the pandemic, a lot of families are struggling, asserted that the district would just tighten its belt and fund these programs out of its existing budget. Even in the face of those kind of statements, we still have 67% who indicate that they would vote yes. So again, I think the findings of the survey are pretty clear cut. Overall, voters are telling us they have increased confidence in the way that the schools are being run and their financial management. They clearly recognize the need for additional funding to improve schools. And even given very specific information about the tax impact, a sizable majority indicate that they would vote yes to support those investments through a bond measure. So our recommendation is that if you choose to proceed, a bond measure is clearly feasible for this year's elections. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you for your presentation. Do we have any questions or comments from the board? Through the chair.
I know it said somewhere in the slideshow, I'm scanning back through it. What did split sample mean? And how come some of like the ranking, finish the job as a ranking, was not included in the split sample?
So there are some places in the poll where we tested slightly different wordings for some questions. Like, for example, when we tested the bond language, for half the sample, we tested the word finish. For half the sample, we tested the word continue.
That's where it said it. Okay.
Yeah. And so that's like it's like a controlled experiment, right? We're seeing if we change one word, does that lead to a different reaction? And the test basically showed us no. Statistically, there was no difference between the two. So when you see that notation in the poll, that's generally what we were doing. There's also some places like when we tested the long list of potential funding priorities, that's just a lot for any individual respondent to wade through. So we cut the list in half. Half the list we asked half the sample, and half the list we asked the other half.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Through the chair. How many of each party did you interview for Democrats, Independents, and Republicans? Because this is a small election. Conservative voters are usually the ones that come out to vote in these smaller elections. And I see the percentages of people supporting, but what was the goal of each?
Yeah, I have to go back and look at what the exact percentages were, but on all the major demographic categories, including party registration, age, gender, ethnicity, and geography, we drew our sample in ways that mirrored the profile of that universe of voters overall. So the number of Democrats, Republicans, and Independents in the poll lines up with the number of Democrats, Independents, and Republicans who are likely to vote in June. We're essentially
Okay.
building into the model that expectation, that
Okay,
it'll
so
be a
that's
somewhat
built
more
in.
conservative.
Just because, you know, at the very end, it shows some of what the groups that are your consistent yeses, but those sometimes are groups that are not turning out. That's why I asked that
Yeah.
question. So when I think about, are we banking on those groups being the ones to take us to the majority? Because if so, I have concern for that.
We're not. I mean, this remains a pretty overwhelmingly Democratic district. And that's one of the reasons why I think those are typically voters who are supportive of investments in schools, and historically they have been here. But when we compare the population of likely voters to the population of residents of the district, it is much whiter, much older, much more conservative, and more homeowners and fewer renters. All of which, as you're saying, are voters that tend to be a little bit more skeptical about tax cuts. But even given that adjustment, it's still a district that tends to be very supportive of making those investments.
Well, we've been fortunate in the last two. So, yeah.
And it's a good point that this year there's a lot of unpredictability, right? Things have been changing very rapidly from a public health perspective, from an economic perspective, from a political perspective. So I do think it makes sense to go in with eyes open and recognize that things can change in ways that are not helpful. And that's why if you choose to move forward, it will be important to have an effort to communicate with the public, let them know this is there, let them know why it's there, and let them know what the benefits will be for local schools.
Of course, thank you.
Through the chair. I just have one question. Do you have any, I know you might not have any data yet, but because this is going to be the first election where everybody is mailed a ballot, right? Do you have any predictions on what you think the outcome will be? Do you think that it's going to stay consistent to what we've seen in the past for a June election? Or do you think that there will be higher voter turnout because of the mail-in ballots? So I don't know if that's something you can speak to, or if you've projected or thought about across the board.
It's a good question. We actually have had two elections now that were all mail. We had the November 2020 election and then the recall election last year. That's a very limited set of data points, and neither of them is going to be anything like the June election. But most of the data has showed that it has had a pretty small impact on turnout. The main reason being that the vast majority of California voters were already registered as permanent absentee voters. It's only about 15% or so that were still voting at the polls. So it's really just that subgroup that might through this different experience, turn out in larger numbers. But I think the safe assumption is that it's not likely to have a big effect on turnout. It'll probably be similar to the past.
Thank you.
I see no other comment. I will note, just piggybacking off of what Trustee Polito said, I think we really want to be intentional. So when it comes to looking at the demographics, because even within the last 2 years, a lot of there's a lot of changes in this area, especially with displacement and new families moving in. So I just want to commend you for your presentation. Extremely thorough. I like that. Got everything charted and color coordinated, which is really well. And so thank you.
My pleasure. Let us know if there's anything else we can do to be helpful.
Wonderful. So next, we will move on to item number 8B, which is the presentation of draft resolution calling for June 2022 bond election for feedback.
Thank you, trustees. This is the conclusion of a very long set of presentations leading up to the bond. So just to remind the public, we presented our facilities update several meetings ago, outlining that we basically at this point, with the sort of onset of the middle school construction project, expended all of our existing bond funds. We also talked a little bit about the last board meeting, the progress that we've made in fiscally and prudently and responsibly managing the past 2 bond funds, showing that we are both under budget and ahead of schedule to pay back quicker. And just tonight, we just heard from Dave highlighting the bond survey results, showing there remains significant community support for a potential bond this June. The last sort of milestone, so to speak, is the presentation of the draft resolution. The resolution, as you may have seen, is very long. It's very detailed. It calls for a couple of things. One is the sort of specific bond language, which you also saw poll tested here. And then it also calls for some of the details of the trustees calling on the county board of electors in terms of what they're actually going to sort of put in the bond ballot, sort of how they're going to call the election. Most of this is sort of legal boilerplate. A lot of the resolution, with the exception of the whereases, looks very similar to what we did for the last bond election. So most of the details are sort of legal boilerplate, but there are a couple of sort of points of nuance. I would highlight and I would appreciate or just thank Trustee Bloom, Trustee Latu for their feedback as part of the members of the bond working group. We're able to collect a lot of the feedback and sort of go through in great length the resolution with our wonderful counsel, Oric, who's also here tonight. If there's any questions or feedback about the resolution, the information that will be provided to voters, we'd be happy to take it now. We're also happy to collect feedback over the next couple of weeks. We will be bringing this back to the board at the next board meeting for your vote. So this is more of an informational item just to get the public and the board some time to sit with a sort of reasonably lengthy legal document and provide any feedback. If there is any, we also, again, have Oric here to answer any questions, should there be any.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or comments from the board?
Through the chair, did Shin Green help with this?
Shin and Michael both helped with this.
Okay, good.
Oric, I think, probably deserves the bulk of the credit, but they did get some help from Shin and Michael.
Yeah, they were part of the bond committee.
Okay, I just want to make sure because he's been with us from the very first one.
I think they're watching us right now. They may have texted me saying
He's very
they're-
detailed. So
they're very detailed.
I know he won't miss anything. I love that about Shin.
and I'm
so,
sure he appreciates the shout
like,
out.
that's why we
Hi,
have him
Shin.
on our team because he makes sure all our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed, and that's why he's a part of the team. So thank you for sharing this, and any feedback I have, I'll follow up in an email.
I just want to say thank you for developing this. I know that this is, the people on the committee, this is a lot of work. So, thank you.
Finally, through the chair. Thank you for all the hard work that everyone put into this. I also just want to make a comment to the community that we have an amazing website page that goes through everything that past bonds have completed and facilities have completed. And so we have a facilities master plan that is clearly aligned with this bond that we've had out for many years. And so I just want to remind the public to go back and look at that as well, and also see how great we've updated how we are working on updating our facilities. And so thank you so much. And I want to continue the work and get to a finishing point of this plan and continue the work of making our facilities amazing. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Will, and to the committee for all your work, tireless meetings. Well done. I will, if I have any feedback, I will provide it in the next couple weeks. Wonderful. Moving along, we will go to item 8C, which is the consideration to approve resolution 2021-/22, and then there was a correction, it's -13, establishing a real property advisory committee.
Thank you, trustees. It's a slightly unusual real property advisory committee, also commonly known as a 7-Eleven committee. For the 2120 Euclid site, this board has acted several times, I believe twice, to declare this 2120 site surplus. The state legislature passed a law fairly recently saying that sites that were not used as schools could be deemed surplus by the board without needing to go through a 7-Eleven committee. It's a fairly recent law. It's a fairly sort of small part of a much bigger law. And when we submitted our documentation to the state showing this board taken action multiple times to declare the site surplus, the state advised us that their interpretation of the law was that we should form a 7-Eleven committee. We respectfully disagree with the state's interpretation of the law. However, we believe the quickest and simplest path to resolving this is not to sort of take legal action appealing the state's decision, but instead to form a 7-Eleven committee to review possible uses for this site. We followed the sort of same format as we've done in the past for this, creating a 7-Eleven, a real property advisory committee to review possible uses for this site. And we're hoping to sort of meet reasonably quickly in light of the board's past action here, and then come up with a report that would then advise the board on whether or not they would like to declare this site surplus in the future. They're kind of an unusual circumstance here. We found out about this relatively recently, and so we are sort of working to move quickly to resolve this so that it doesn't distract from some of our other things that we have going on, specifically the possible uses of this site. There also was a 7-Eleven committee for the flood site. We do believe that that is
Yeah, that already
remains intact and there's no issues with that. But we are sort of double checking, just making sure nothing has changed as we sort of proceed with this.
Thank you. Questions, comments from the board?
Through the chair, how long do we think this is going to set us back as far as timing is concerned?
It's a good question. We are working to resolve this as quickly as possible. I think there is a reasonable chance that we could actually have a report for the board at the next board meeting. But again, it's a little bit up to the advisory committee. They have to form their own rules and things like that. So, you know, it's.
But doesn't the 7-Eleven committee also have to go through a process of offering the space to other districts to see if they're interested in it? Isn't that part of the 7-Eleven process?
No, that's not part of the 7-Eleven process. That is part of the surplus process. I think is actually how we sort of flagged, the state flagged the issue of this, if we were in the process of offering this site. So I believe the 7-Eleven committee, their primary responsibility is to advise the board on whether or not the site should be deemed surplus and what the possible uses are. But that's it. Purely an advisory
But
body.
at some
It doesn't
point, we
actually
do have to offer it.
yes, I believe that's correct. And we were in that process before. So I'll see exactly where we are with our county council on that. I'm not sure. I don't believe this should slow down that process.
Question, who's built up with the 7-Eleven committee?
I'm sorry.
Like, who builds up this committee? Who is the committee made out of?
Oh, on the last page of the resolution, it lists the names of the members. We did a lot of outreach, including some members who were on prior 7-Eleven committees. The resolution, or excuse me, the state portion of EDCO that governs this recommends specific types of people, as it often does, that are for this. And so we've tried to find representatives of each of those categories.
Sorry. Any other questions or comments? I have a concern, but I think my concern is there usually a standard of how many residents are on this committee? Or is it just kind of up to our discretion?
It's a minimum of 7, no more than 11. That's why. it's
Those
called
are
a
members. I think the question was residents of East Palo Alto. There's not necessarily a specific guideline for the number of people who live within East Palo Alto. The rule sort of recommends that there's, someone who lives in East Palo Alto. Our list has, I think, a much higher percentage of people who live in East Palo Alto.
So are we asking because we think that we should ensure we have more residents in the committee? Is that what
Yeah,
you're?
I think my thought is looking at that list now, I would feel more comfortable if there was
Majority of residents were.
a larger number of
I'm-
residents.
I'm looking at the list now, and there are, actually, I recounted, there are 5.
5 of the 9.
I mean, we have even teachers and administrators that live in the community, so I think there are people that can wear multiple hats. 'Cause
And
that's some of the criteria.
And these 5, are they like 5 that live in East Palo Alto or in our district?
In East.
No, in our district, it could be Bellhaven or East Palo Alto.
Yeah, I'm not sure the
Correct, but-
specific addresses.
But I'm looking, from my understanding, I know for sure 4 of them live in East Palo Alto.
That's just my preference.
I believe it is possible for us also to add members as we proceed. I know we've done that in the past. We may need to do that at a board meeting. We may be able to have them listen in as advisors, and the members will, of course, the meetings will, I think, be public. Other members of the community could come in and comment.
Yeah, if that ability is there,
Yeah.
then I'm in favor of moving forward. I just want to make sure that there is a way that if someone, maybe a resident that lives here on Euclid wants to join the conversation, because there's residents in the street, that opportunity is there.
Yeah, that's a really great point. So the members, these meetings will be open to the public.
Yeah.
There are public meetings. We will advertise them as such should the board approve this body. There is a public comment period actually, similar to board meeting, for members to comment publicly, or anyone from the public to comment publicly at the Real Property Advisory Committee meetings. Additionally, if there are members who would like to talk about the intended use of this site, there's a form up on the website. We've had a couple of public meetings. We're happy to have more, plan on having more.
And this committee is not to discuss the intended use of the site, it's just to recognize it as an excess property.
It is to also determine possible uses.
Oh, it is? So
Yeah, but
that's
it would not necessarily say, company A or company B, but it could say, we recommend the site could be used for
And
housing,
provide a list.
commercial,
Oh, okay.
a park, something like that, but reasonably high level. It's not the granular use of.
Through the chair, we also put the agenda on Agenda Online. So it's, just to reiterate what Will has mentioned, it is completely public, and there's approximately 2 advisory meetings and then a public hearing meeting.
Wonderful. I like the transparency. So if there are no other questions or comments, I will entertain a motion for item 8C.
The chair, do I have to read it first? Since it's a resolution?
We make
took
a
the
motion
first
second.
and then read it.
I'll make a motion to provide a meeting.
Thank you.
I'll second it. So resolution 2021-2022-13. Whereas pursuant to the California Education Code and the Government Code, there are certain procedural requirements and a lot of other language after that.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
I don't know why I thought resolution's a roll call. But, that's just probably how it was done at some point.
All opposed, say nay. Motion carries 4-0. Thank you. Moving on to item number 9 from our superintendent's report.
Thank you. Do you remember when they would do like trustee? I thought I just wanted this for resolutions, and I just realized we don't do that.
right, awesome. Through the chair and Board of Trustees, I would like to use this opportunity just to give some highlights of events that have taken place since we last met as a board. Highlighting the next slide, learning and development, health and safety, leadership and community. And just to reiterate, these are topics that we also share in our newsletter. Around learning and development, just wanted to touch base a little bit about and reiterate some information that Lara Berenin has shared around the LCAP engagement, RTA evaluation, soft launch, an update on the event at the Black History Month Family Art Night at Castaño, and then some good news around Cesar Chavez Ravenswood Middle School robotics. As Lara mentioned, she provided you as a Director of Curriculum and Instruction an update on the local control accountability plan. But one thing I would definitely want to emphasize that I'm very appreciative of Lara Berenin and also Allison Officer, who is another employee who supports with compliance, is focusing on how we can reshape our LCAP community engagement with the broader community. We want to make an effort to reach those family members and community members who typically do not respond to survey or attend community meetings. And so that means that we are going beyond the families that we are usually hearing. We're reaching out to family members and community members that we typically do not hear from, which creates that, we have to give effort then to make phone calls, arrange meetings, be at the school sites and wait for folks who might, show up at pickup and drop off. So it's more intentional, I think more intimate, and potentially we might learn more things beyond what a survey would reveal. In regards to our RTA evaluation soft launch, just to remind the team here, this, the agreement was made in November 18th with the teachers union to implement our new innovative and meaningful evaluation process. And just recently, this past month, our management team who does evaluate certificated teachers who are RTA unit members participated in the training, and you can see the three main goals there that we tackled, which was connect as an evaluation team and have a space for reflection and collaboration, situate the launch in a framework to both support and push our thinking while attending to both the technical and relational aspects of our leadership as we navigate this systemic change. And what I mean by the technical and the relational, if you look at the circle there, looking at those specific functions that would fall under the technical being at the top and relational being at the bottom of the green line. And then surface and document what is already being done as well as what is working and what questions and concerns are arising. This is new for everybody who is involved. And so some questions that came up on the technical side is how can we be more intentional with the goal setting process? We recognize and understand that that process was tight because of the timeline and when the agreement was approved. And so trying to make sure that next year, as we set those goals, we do those very early in the school year, at the beginning in late August, that will lead into late October, versus us having to do that in a short period of time as soon as the agreement was made. And then under the relational piece, some questions and things that came up. An example is how do we keep the authenticity and organic nature of hallway conversations and passing while also navigating the formalized form? So trying to capture as much opportunity as possible, building trust and building confidence in the process, but still having to document and move forward and make changes and suggest areas of growth, corrections and areas of growth. So we're working through all of that and led by our Chief Academic Officer, Jennifer Grabham. Tony Stone was also helped support with, our HR Director helped support with the presentation along with Jenna Menti, who the board approved to support with the implementation. Next slide, thank you. So last night, Black History Month Family Art Night at Castaño School of the Arts took place. And you see in the middle there, Andrea, who was our third grade student who helped design the poster there, and her father. And so Andrea, in collaboration with the former student of the vice principal, designed this poster. And on the next slide, you'll see the different types of the activities that the school provided, where they were familiar with different artists and were able to try to emulate the artwork. We had a fairly good turnout. I think Trustee Brahman, you were there along with the family of Trustee Blue was present. The family was there. Thank you so much. Next slide. Some good news here with our robotics team at Cesar Chavez Ravenswood Middle School. They definitely are continuing to be successful in robotics, led by our CTE teacher, Tina Collier. They constantly have been competing even during a pandemic. And even this past Friday before the 4-day weekend, they were recording their performances to see how many stacks of 3 they could get in each blue square there. And the students that are in the photo there, all 4 of them are Ravenswood Middle School, Cesar Chavez Ravenswood Middle School students. And obviously very happy and content there because 16 of them are currently made it to state. 16 teams have made it to state, which will be held in Sacramento. And then we already have 3 teams that have made it to Worlds, which will be hosted in Texas. Yes, so a MOU will be coming before the board so that we can get approval for them to travel. So it's great news. In regards to health and safety, very quick update around our child nutrition education department and just a quick update on the weekly on-campus testing and at-home tests. So please, I encourage you, if you have social media, to go visit our Ravenswood Child Nutrition and Education Department Instagram at Ravenswood_team_CNE. I don't believe this link will work here on our camp in our district office, but you will be able to observe some of the activities that are taking place led by our CNE department. We often do testing, taste testing of fresh, healthy foods at each of our schools. And this past week recently, it was held at Los Robles Ronald McNair, where students had an opportunity to indicate whether or not they really enjoyed the cherry tomatoes and the mozzarella cheese sticks. And some of those cherry tomatoes were harvested from their own garden at Los Robles Ronald McNair. And in regards to our weekly on-campus testing and at-home tests, we're still continuing to do the weekly testing at the schools. And you can see our schedule for this coming week and beyond, actually, not this coming week. And then thanks to the Ravenswood Family Health Center, they donated at-home tests for our team to distribute to students or staff who test positive. We want to be able to send home those students or staff members with additional tests so that families too, or whoever is living in the home with them, are able to assess how they're doing before returning to work or going back to school. And you see a quote here from a parent at Los Robles Ronald McNair saying, "Thank you for always making sure our kids have a safe return to school." And then lastly, another spotlight at Cesar Chavez Ravenswood Middle School is that our girls basketball team made it to the championships game. And remember, we are part of the Arts David League, I believe it's the name of the league. And yeah, they made it to the championships. We were not victorious, but we made it, yes. Go Lions. Our girls too made it, yes. And in regards to just community engagement, just to remind the community that on the first Thursday of every month, I have office hours at 6 p.m. And the next one is scheduled for March 3rd. Here in this photo, you see several family members, I think each elementary school with some of their families also having students in the middle school were represented, along with Allison Officer, who's to the right, Miss Alexa Hamilton, who's at the top, who's an art teacher at Los Robles Ronald McNair, and then our outreach coordinator at the time, who was at the bottom there, Mayra, with her baby. And the students, there's one student here pictured, but as soon as Miss Hamilton was speaking about her art class, a couple of those students are actually in her art class, came back running to the Zoom, showcasing their artwork. But we had just an open dialogue, answered questions, and I welcome any family member, future family member to join me. That's it.
Wonderful. Do we have any questions or comments from the board? I think I only have one note, and I have been in conversation with the superintendent. But to our families, I do want to acknowledge that we have had an update with the state going back into, being a maskless county. And so I just want to say that we are continuing to look at our process and making sure that we are also looking at the way that we continue to move forward with COVID and how that affects our families.
Through the chair, thank you for bringing that up because I did raise the question of are our students being expected to wear masks outside when obviously that's not a part of the mandate, and San Mateo County's actually lifted the mask mandate, and so I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, I think that's something that I talked with staff, and that's something that we want to explore to make sure that, of course we want to do what's best for our community, but that also means looking at what our current standards are in the county and aligning to make sure
With
that
the
it
health
makes sense.
experts, yes, thank you.
Still in discussion, nothing final, but
Right, and so
it's
we'll
a
provide,
discussion.
we'll
Well, I
provide,
look forward to that discussion if we need to have it at the board level.
awesome.
Wonderful. Moving on to item 10A, consideration to approve resolution 2021-2022/2022-10 board member excused absences. And this is for Vice President Shubomahi. I will entertain a motion to approve 10A.
I move to approve 10A.
I will second.
Resolution 2021-2022-10, board member excused absences. Whereas the education code authorizes that we can be sick, etc.
Work commitments.
All in favor, say aye. All opposed, say nay. Motion carries 4-0. Moving on to item number 10B, board reports and communication.
Two things to report. Number one, I did a tour. I was invited to tour Star Vista and discovered all their wonderful resources. And it is a wonderful organization for everybody who's been helping Star Vista. And then secondly, I really enjoyed attending the Castano Art Night. That was great fun. Obviously, a lot of work went into it. Everybody was engaged. The craft projects were very exciting, particularly that each craft project was aligned with an artist. And seeing the examples of the artwork and seeing the children just really enjoying it. And honestly, the best Caribbean food around. Have you heard? No. Okay, so maybe the second best Caribbean food around. But it was a really fun event, and I look forward to attending more things besides.
Any others? So I actually do have a few. We had a bond meeting, but you got the presentation. I think my second thing is I would like to apologize for the confusion in communications with the request that was sent through the city council. As some of you all know, our mayor, Abrika, had reached out and requested a joint meeting between the Ravenswood City School District and the city of East Palo Alto. The city has been kind of on a tour with meeting with other entities like the Planning Commission, and I believe they're also working with the East Palo Alto Sanitary District to set up these joint meetings. And from my understanding, with talking to Mayor Abrika, it was an opportunity to establish a better relationship, as some trustees might not be very familiar with who the current council members are and vice versa. And so this would potentially be a meeting that would just be them presenting kind of updates on where they are and where they come from, and also us also doing the same with sharing what we've been working on. But of course, this is a request, and in the email, it didn't come off that way, and I apologize. And so I just wanted to bring this back up so that we can have a better mode of communication and also to be able to provide direction to our staff.
Through the chair. So, I mean, I'm so happy that they extended the invitation. I think it's great for them to want to establish a relationship. I know that we have our subcommittees, and I was hoping that we could get that going before we bring the two bodies together and provide updates through that as a starting point. And I also know that the message that was sent had dates that I also was not available. And if we do this, I would love to be there. So there's also the concern about the dates that were provided in the time frame. So if we do decide to schedule this, I would like for us to look further down into the year and see where would be the best time for us to meet. Maybe on a month we only have one meeting versus the regular two. You know, there's just so much room. Maybe a little bit more towards the end of the year. I'm also concerned about using staff time during a busy season. So maybe if we can look at a season that's a little bit, even though it's never slow pace, but that gives us a little bit more breathing room. And then also in the meantime, while we figure out when that date is, we can start up the intergovernmental committee and start with those updates. And that way, when we do find a more suitable time for our boards to come together, we'll have somewhere to base it on. And I think it'd be great also if the intergovernmental committee considers, you know, agenda items that we can jointly discuss that would make sense for both sides. So I appreciate the invitation. There was my only two questions was about the timing. If we can just give ourselves a little bit more flexibility to find when would be the best time to do this. And then also give the space for the subcommittee to kick off and start establishing that relationship that would be great to have with the city.
Other questions?
I, just through the chair, I think that it would be great to do something for our community to also, for our city council to hear the projects that Ravenswood is doing and has done and the work that has been done, because I do know it's not always discussed except in these meetings. And so I think this is a great way for us as a board to continue to have visibility in one of the cities that we are part of. And so I think that it would be great. But again, I would like to, as Trustee Polito said as well, if the agenda is like to be part of, like the groups to be part of what the agenda would be from both sides. I think that would be a wise choice. But I'm thankful that they do want to have a conversation and host a conversation for the community together, because I think that it is important for our community to know that we are working together and we are making our schools the best schools in our community and in our city. So thank you.
So I think we're leaning that that we would like to move forward. I think from our staff to establish that communication, but also look at different dates, maybe that are a month out, so that we have enough time, like a month plus out. I think it'd be more ideal, just so that we all have time to adjust schedules, but also that gives enough time to establish what the agenda, because of course we want to be intentional, but we also don't want to discuss things that, you know, are in deliberations and stuff. So I think just moving forward, establishing the connection, saying that, you know, our board is leaning in this direction. Can we get some potential dates, and preferably not ones that are on the same week that we have board, but then they have opposite. So just looking at dates in the future and then,
I think it'd be great also to look at the governance calendar. These next couple months are usually our busiest months for meetings. Our meetings tend to be a lot longer, budget conversations. So that's what I'm saying. Let's also consider, you know, when is a time that's best suited also for the workflow we have going on our end. I know March tends to be very busy,
like,
so
are-
that's what I'm thinking beyond that.
I have a question. Are we allowed, like, if we were to go into this, are we allowed to discuss that we wanted to go out for a bond? But after.
Sorry, my mic was off. If we were to meet prior to March 10th, where we're hopefully going to present to the board to approve the resolution to move forward with the bond, then we can. But after that, we cannot.
Yeah, I don't know. Doubtful at a time.
But I'm sure, like I said, there's an intergovernmental subcommittee. They could convene before the main meeting, and these updates can be provided that way as well. These reports and updates can be given in the meantime until we figure out a date that works for us to all come together and, you know, collaborate. So I think there'll be opportunity to be able to do that.
Wonderful. I think you have direction.
To just to reiterate, then to schedule a subcommittee meeting, intergovernance subcommittee meeting, and then figure out a time after looking at the governance calendar that works best for Ravenswood, and then possible dates that both governance teams can
Open agenda.
attend, and then looks like maybe a month or so out.
Wonderful. If there's nothing else, the next regular board meeting will be held on March 10th, 2022. An open session will be at 7:15 p.m. I will adjourn the RCSD board meeting at